Raggedy Ann was the brainchild of Johnny Gruelle in 1915. She got her name when he combined the titles of two poems, The Raggedy Man, and Little Orphan Annie. Written by the poet James Whitcomb Riley. We hope you enjoy the history of Raggedy Ann and Andy. The images, including year of production, have been included to show you how they changed over time. The very first Raggedy Ann doll was made by Johnny Gruelle's mother for his sister. The legend goes that he retrieved that original doll from his mother's attic and gave it to his daughter Marcella, and it became her favorite toy. The first 200 or so dolls to be sold commercially were handmade by members of the Gruelle family and typically marked with a rubber-stamped date on tummy or back or were unmarked. Johnny Gruelle started writing stories about Raggedy Ann and in 1918 published a book containing some of those stories. The publisher, P.F. Volland, licensed the doll and toy company to mass-produce dolls which were sold along with each copy of the book. It was one of the first ever merchandise media marketing tie-ins. The cottage, Raggedy Ann dolls had sewn on black or brown fabric feet, challis dresses of earth tone prints, and some dolls had blue and white striped legs. A unique feature of the patent, Raggedy Ann doll was that she had the words, "Patented September 7, 1915, stamped on her belly. Later she changed slightly. The head grew rounder and fuller, the printed facial features became darker and the wigs became lusher. Raggedy Ann's brother, Raggedy Andy, made his debut in 1920. Legend holds that a friend of Johnny's sister visited him and brought him Raggedy Andy and told him this doll had been made by her mother at the same time Johnny's mother made Raggedy Ann. The two friends played with their brother and sister dolls constantly. In 1925 the heads on the Andy doll were scaled down and their faces were slightly modified. There is a noticeable difference among the single eyelash dolls. These dolls appeared with single lower eyelashes instead of the customary multiple lashes. Most single eyelash, Raggedy Andys possess a linear mouth with a small red center. The Volland Company took a serious financial blow in the stock market crash of 1929 and was scrambling to stay afloat. While they cut corners on some of their other products, they didn't mess with Raggedy Ann and Andy because the dolls and related books were their biggest sellers. P.F. Volland Company ultimately didn't survive. It filed for bankruptcy in 1934 and sold the illustrations and publishing rights to M.A. Donahue. However, Johnny Gruelle retained the patent and copyright to the doll design. In 1935, Molly E's Doll Outfitters jumped into the void following the Volland bankruptcy and started making Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls. There was just one problem: they didn't have permission to do so. She had been in talks with Gruelle before he made his agreement with Exposition. The dispute was finally settled in Johnny's favor in 1937, just a few months before he died. After Johnny Gruelle's death, his widow, Myrtle, formed the John E. Gruelle Company, bought back the rights to the books, and licensed Georgene Novelties to produce dolls. They made many variations of the doll from 1930 through 1963. The most desirable dolls have black outlined noses, floppy cloth bodies stitched at the knees and elbows, usually have red and white striped legs. Yarn used for the hair changed color several times, from strawberry blonde to a deep orange. Tin or plastic button eyes were added and the mouth more defined. Various cloth labels sewn into the side seam of these dolls all include Johnny Gruelle's own Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls. The Awake Asleep dolls were unique in that they were reversible and had two faces, one awake and one asleep. Turning the doll around was all that was needed to show the other face. They were made in the early 1940s. At the same time, home seamstresses started making their own Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls from a pattern published under license in 1940 by the McCall's Pattern Company. The Second World War imposed rough economies on everyone, including Raggedy Ann and Andy. The war-era dolls used the same face for both Ann and Andy and varied print fabrics for Ann's dress and Andy's shirt. No outline on their noses and different prints of fabrics used on feet. The post-war dolls looked exactly the same as the wartime dolls. The only difference was the word, Silsby, on the tag. Myrtle Gruelle remarried and Silsby was her new married name. The Silsby dolls were only produced for about a year, then the name was removed from the tag. In the 1950s Georgene Novelties began making the dolls in a variety of larger sizes, up to 52 inches tall. Except for the size, however, the dolls were identical. Undressed, there was no difference between a Raggedy Ann and a Raggedy Andy. Georgene's 25-year license agreement ended in early 1963. In 1962, Knickerbocker, owned by Warner Brothers, made a bid to the Gruel family for the soon-to-expire Dolls license. The bid was accepted, and they took over the manufacturing in 1963. Their company slogan was, "Joy of the Toy," and this phrase was included on the tag of every Raggedy Ann and Andy doll. Unlike Georgene's, Knickerbocker did not put the year of manufacture on the tags. Raggedy Ann's dress had different fabric variations. Raggedy Andy also had a few different variations on his shirt. They were also made with a wind-up music box placed inside the doll. Knickerbocker made many different variations of the dolls. There were flexies with wire inside the arms and legs so they could be posed. There was a special U.S. Bicentennial edition in 1976. Knickerbocker introduced related tie-in merchandise, including tote bags and bed linens. In 1983, Warner Brothers sold Knickerbocker and the Raggedy Ann license rights to Hasbro. Hasbro granted the license for doll production to Applause, but oversaw marketing campaigns that would see Raggedy Ann make her debut as a balloon in the 1984 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, as well as star in an animated Adventures of Raggedy Ann and Andy TV series from 1988 to 1992. Applause, Russ Berry was granted the doll production license after Hasbro bought Knickerbocker in 1983. Their version of the dolls was more uniform and brightly colored. It was during their tenure as license holder that Raggedy Ann was inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame in 2002 and joined by her brother in 2007. Applause, Russ Berry created the first licensed version of an African-American Raggedy Ann in 1994 named Beloved Belindy, a character from the early books. The version shown here was made by Applause and sold with a Playskool label. Aurora World Inc. acquired the doll license under Hasbro in 2012. The Aurora dolls have returned to a more vintage look, closer to that of the early Georgene dolls. Raggedy Ann has lived through a lot of history and has herself become a part of our culture. A traditionally embroidered, "I love you" heart on Ann's chest is her legacy. These are a few of the other Raggedy Ann and Andy items that collectors have grown to love. Have you heard about Robin Amato? She's got to be the most epic Raggedy Ann collector out there.
Most of my neighbors do not know what goes on in this house.
At any given time, the Amatos are under the watchful eyes of over 1,000 rag dolls that have taken over every single room of their house.
As you can see, my wife is obsessed with Raggedy Ann.
Having our Raggedy Ann tea party. Having fun? In this cabinet, there are approximately 44 music boxes, 36 porcelain figurines. We found these at a flea market, my husband and I. They are from the early to mid-1920s. We paid $20 for this pair, and they're well worth close to $1,000.
You know, as time goes on, it keeps growing and growing.
This is my most special doll. She's from the 1930s.
Growing and growing.
If I had to estimate what I've spent on my Raggedy Ann collection, I would say over $20,000.
Robin collects the Raggedy dolls. For me, I collect the receipts.